I want to start off by thanking all of you, obviously, for taking time out of your day to participate in these sessions. And a special thanks to Christine and Peter for pulling us in. It's always exciting for the PSC participants to get the opportunity to come out and meet our customers and share a little bit about what we do. So I brought an army with me here today. So I'll start with introductions and then talk a little bit about what we want to cover here today. So my name is Gisela Higgins. I'm the Director of Change Management for the Procurement Service Center, responsible for change management activities and project management activities within the department. And then I'm actually, if you guys don't mind, introducing each of yourselves.
She's changed it up on us. She told us she was going to do the introduction. It's change management, she says. Absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Teresa Rausch. I'm the Director of Procurement and Contract Services at the PSC. So the folks on my team are the purchasing agents and contract administrators that help you work through your procurement needs.
Hello. Do you have to push a button? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm Maria Berman. I'm Payables Manager. I'm sure I've talked to some of you or emailed. And our team, of course, is the one that we get to pay all your invoices and everything you send us down.
I'm Jamie Mendez. I'm a procurement system administrator. I manage our Jagger marketplace application from a system standpoint, from technical standpoint.
Hi, everyone. I'm Annie Becker, and I am the PSC's Strategic Procurement Analyst. I am on the Strategic Procurement team, and my team manages our supplier relationships and agreements and contracts with our strategic partners. And we also have a few folks on our team focused on business intelligence, the data that we have, cleaning it, and making it useful for the decisions that we make at the PSC.
Thank you, guys. So when we were discussing originally with Peter and Christine what subjects we wanted to cover around marketplace and in general procurement practices, one of the very first questions I ask for these types of training is this a how do I do it training, or is this a why do I do it the way I do it training? And they responded that it was more of the why with a little bit of the how mixed in. So that's what we've tailored here today. The takeaway is that we're going to keep it relatively high level. We're covering a number of subjects in a short period of time. We can come back. We enjoy coming back. So to the extent that we need to go deeper in any of the areas, happy to do so, and we can coordinate that for in the future. Another thing to keep in mind is that what we're covering right now is just the marketplace related activities, so the things that relate to buying goods and services within the marketplace technology. There's obviously another side of activities that the Procurement Service Center supports, and that's around the travel program and some payments that go outside of the system, not covering, or outside of the marketplace or Concur systems. Not covering those things today, but that's something that we can follow up with in the future if needed. So before I talk about what we're going to cover today, I want to poll the audience really quick just so that we internally have a sense of what your roles are, at least in the room. How many of you interact with Marketplace currently? Great. That's fantastic. And I assume some of you are the ones that are submitting requisitions and some of you are the ones that are approving requisitions. Can I just get a show of hands on those that are submitting requisitions? And approving requisitions or approving invoices? Okay, a good mix. So we'll cover something for each of you. So what we have today is we'll cover a little bit about shopping from a catalog. That's the actual goods that you pull from a catalog. And then we're going to cover our non-catalog requests, which ones are the ones that we believe at least this department is most frequently or this school is most frequently going to use, and why you need to use them the way you need to use them. We'll high level do an overview of what the actual process looks like in Marketplace. And then we're going to dive a little deeper into the purchasing guidelines, rules, responsibilities, things of that nature. And then a little deeper dive into the invoicing process. And then hopefully have some time for questions. I do want to make sure that we cover content that is helpful and beneficial for you, so we'll probably stop in between each section for questions in that area, and then any broad questions at the end. Sound good? Okay, then I'm going to hand it over to Annie to kick us off.
Great. Thank you, Gisela, and thank you everyone for being here today and spending a little time with us. My portion in today's presentation is relatively brief, and I'm going to keep it that way because we have a lot to get through. But I do want to second what Gisela said around reaching out afterwards if need be, if you have any additional questions. As I mentioned, I'm part of the strategic team, so we manage our strategic supplier relationships as well as our agreements and contracts with those suppliers. And also our data intelligence team manages our data, cleans our data, and makes it useful for making strategic contracting decisions down the road. So to begin, sounds like most of you have been in Marketplace, which is awesome. So we're going to start with the question, what products or commodities have catalogs that we can shop from in Marketplace? So if you go into Marketplace on the home page, if you scroll down a little bit further from the very top, you'll see this banner that says Showcases. And within there, you'll see at the top of that are CU strategic suppliers. So there's 7 tiles here. We have actually 13 strategic suppliers, but these 7 are the ones that have catalogs that you can shop from in our Marketplace. These suppliers cover the categories of office supplies, computer equipment, scientific supplies, gases, furniture, and copiers. However, these 7 are not our only catalog suppliers that you can shop from in Marketplace, because if you scroll down a little bit further past this section, you'll get to this next section that's titled CU Catalog Suppliers, and there's 28 other suppliers in this section that you can also shop from. As easy as clicking on their tile, and then it will take you to the punch-out version of that supplier's website, which is basically just a CU-specific version of their shopping environment for our use. These catalog suppliers cover more scientific supplies and equipment, maintenance, repair, and operations products, medical and surgical products, technology, IT products and peripherals, life science products and equipment, and much more as well. Any questions at this point? Okay. So why should we purchase from our catalog suppliers? There's a ton of reasons. The biggest ones are listed on this slide. First and foremost, it's a relatively easy, relatively user-friendly and consistent shopping experience for each of you to log into Marketplace, click on those tiles, and then be transferred to the punch-out version of CU's site with that supplier. You also receive our guaranteed CU contract pricing. So the Procurement Service Center spends a lot of time developing these awesome university-wide agreements for use, but if we're not shopping through our Marketplace, we're not guaranteeing that we're getting that pricing. So we try to work with our suppliers to make sure that we're getting our CU pricing, even if we go through a different means of purchasing, using your P card, for example. We try to make sure that happens, but that's an almost impossible thing for us to verify and confirm and monitor on a daily basis. So the only way to make sure that you are getting that contracted pricing is purchasing through the Marketplace. Higher quality reporting and data. So this is really important to the business intelligence portion of my team. So those folks really care about the quality of data that we get so that we can make good decisions from it. And we get really great data if you purchase through Marketplace, and if you go around it, we get pretty crappy data that we can't do a whole lot with. No tax. As a public entity, we shouldn't be paying for tax on our purchases. So if you go through Marketplace, this is guaranteed from the get-go, without you having to kind of worry about reconciling that or receiving a credit for it after the fact. And then finally, no additional time spent reconciling P-card transactions. So I'm not sure how much that would apply to all of you in this room, but depending on your P-card use, it can be a significant portion of time, and i.e. money, to reconcile P-cards. So that's something that you don't have to do if you go through Marketplace. Awesome, yes. I'm a fan of that. Any questions at this point? Okay, great. Finally, what is mandatory? So we have a very, very few agreements that are mandatory to use. The ones that are listed on this slide are all of them. So like I said, very, very few, just a couple, but CCI, Colorado Correctional Industries for office furniture, Konica Minolta or Xerox for copier rentals, Staples for office supplies. We have 4 suppliers that cover administrative, manual, and IT temp staffing needs, and then 6 suppliers that cover moving and relocation services. So these are our only agreements that are mandatory, and that mandatory designation is just something that we give certain suppliers based on business needs. So earlier in the presentation, we were talking about our strategic suppliers. That is also a designation that we give certain suppliers that we deem critical in the day-to-day operations of the university in our office, classroom, and research spaces. Yes, absolutely. If you go to our website and go to our commodities page, there's a purchasing tab at the top, and go to our commodities listing. You can search for, I guess, any of the categories that we have and click on the links, and you'll get to a how to buy page that will list who those supplier options are. Yes. Okay. Yeah, that's a great question. I will find you and leave you with my card after this, and we can talk more about it offline. But yes, in special circumstances like that, we can figure out if there's a way to purchase a product through CCI that will fit your needs, or else if we need to look elsewhere, we can do that as well. Yeah. Okay, great. With that, I will hand it over to Teresa.
Thanks, Annie. Okay, so you need to buy something, but it doesn't fit in any of those catalog categories. There's something that you need to buy, but you don't know, or you're not sure if it's in those categories or in those catalogs, or you've looked there and you haven't been able to find what you need. So I'm going to talk through a little bit about how you do that outside of the catalogs. So the first thing that's most important to know is that we have a number of different forms in Marketplace. And we need to do everything through a form because there's a lot of work, activity, et cetera, requirements that are associated with those forms that get you to the right place within your procurement process. So there are the forms that you see listed here. We're not going to go into every single one of them in great detail because that would be a very long session to do that. So instead, we're going to highlight the ones that are the most frequently used. And those are the 3 called the non-catalog form, the standing purchase order, or SPO as we like to call it, and then the payment voucher form. And you'll find those forms if you're on that landing page for Marketplace. If you're not familiar, but if you go down below the catalog, or actually they're up towards the top, you'll see all of those tiles for those different forms there. Okay. So let's talk first about the non-catalog form. And as this says, this is the form that you use to buy something in general that you want to just set up a purchase order, not a standing purchase order, but just a purchase order on. We'll talk about the difference in a second. And so you're going to do that from someone who's not available through the catalog. Now, we have an enormous number of registered suppliers with the university. I think it's somewhere around like 30,000. Yeah, 34,000 suppliers that are actually registered with CU. So you can do business with any one of those suppliers if we do it the right way. So there's a great list of suppliers that are there. So you can use this non-catalog form if you know that you want to buy something from a certain supplier, but they're not a catalog. Or if you think that maybe they're registered, you can go in and use this non-catalog form and help you can actually search for that particular supplier by that supplier's name if you think that they're in our system. Now, there are a couple of conditions around using a non-catalog form. So one of the things is you kind of need to know what you're buying already, and you need to know what the unit price for that good or service is going to be. And then also, again, that supplier must be set up as a registered supplier in our CU database. Now, if you know somebody that you want to work with and they're not registered, if you go through and you search and they're not registered, then you can point them to our supplier portal on our PSC website, and there's tons of information in there about how a supplier should get registered. There you go. So request new supplier. It's right there, and it'll take you through that option as well. Okay, so you might be thinking, okay, well, I'm not sure, I've never done that before, so what would be an example? So we came up with a couple of examples here. Let's say you want to engage a particular consultant for an engagement, but that consultant obviously doesn't have a catalog. So this is an area where you can go in, see if they're registered. If they're not, request that they get registered, which will be done for you from the PSC. And use them. Now, what you need to make sure when you're doing an engagement like this, again, going back to the requirement, you want to be able to make sure that you know, I'm going to spend $24,000 for this engagement. It's going to be paid out equally over 6 months. So that's the kind of information that you'll want to have available for yourself when you get ready to fill out this form. So that form's going to ask you for that. Okay, that's one example. Second example that we thought of to share with you today is, I need to buy something, but I'm not sure who I want to buy it from. So you can still use this form, and instead of when you go into the form and you put a supplier's name or you search for a supplier, you can simply put in the supplier field these words noted bid vendor. That's an option there. And for the bid vendor, what that will do is when that comes to my team at the PSC, they will know that they need to go out and find a supplier for you. And we'll figure out the right way to do that. And we'll talk a little bit later in the presentation about the different ways that we would help you find that right supplier. So this again is when you're not sure who you're going to use, but you know you need something that will kick it into our queues to take some action on. Does that make sense? Everybody good there? Okay. All right. Some of the other forms, we wanted to talk a little bit about the standing purchase order form. This is a very common form. It is used, some of you, if you've come in other organizations, it's sometimes called a blanket purchase order. But in essence, what it is you're basically standing up a purchase order to be used for goods or services, again, with a supplier. But you're not, you know about what you're going to pay for all of that, but you're not exactly sure in what increment you're going to pay it. So maybe you are going to buy, some of the examples here, right? You may have a piece of equipment somewhere and you know you're going to need maintenance or repairs on that over the year's period, but you're not exactly sure when those maintenance calls are going to be necessary. You got a pretty good feeling of what you've got in your budget, so you may say, I know I'm going to spend about, $10,000 or $12,000 for this maintenance. I'm going to open up a standing purchase order, which means I got approval to spend that $12,000 with that supplier, but it's going to happen randomly or maybe periodically, but I'm not sure what the cadence is going to be over the next period that standing purchase order is open for. So that's one of the examples here. Another example is you need consumables for a lab or for a project that you're working on, but you're not sure how fast you're going to churn through those consumables. So you want to open up and allow yourself $15,000 worth of spend, and as the invoices come in, you will aggregate that spend or you delegate that spend against that $15,000 that's there. So that's the purpose of having a standing purchase order. It's a good tool when you're not exactly sure how those invoices are going to flow in, but you have a pretty good idea of how much you're going to spend with that particular supplier. One thing to always remember is it's really important. So when it gets into the Maria's team's area, when we have to pay the invoices against that, it's really important to make sure that you have set up your standing purchase order in the right way. So you want to put in the total amount, the total expected amount of your expenditure, and you want to do a unit of 1. So again, it's going to be a very simple math equation for the payables team to be able to do when they get that first invoice that's for a percentage or a small amount of that 15,000 or whatever you've set up. They can use that to do the math and degradate against that total amount that's out there. Any questions on a standing purchase order? Standing purchase orders are only set up for when you have an expense greater than $10,000. So make sure that your expense is $10,000 and above when you try to use the SPO form. Otherwise, it will get kicked back to you and said you can't do it that way. Okay? All right. So, move on. All right. The next form is called the payment voucher form, and this seems to be very popular, although it is very specific. There are a lot of words around when you can and cannot or should not use a payment voucher form. We have this flexibility because we know in some cases it doesn't make sense to issue a purchase order to someone to facilitate the payment to them. So if you think of what a purchase order does, a purchase order is a conveyance that gets sent to a supplier that says, we, the University of Colorado, agree that we are going to pay you based on all these terms and conditions that are on our purchase order for the services or goods that you're going to provide us. Well, in some cases, if you're paying something like an honoraria payment, it doesn't make sense to send that person who's going to be the recipient of that honoraria a purchase order. So, therefore, this payment voucher form is out there, and you can use this in those cases. You can also use this in the case of, say, you're part of a professional organization. Maybe you're part of the American Medical Association or something, and your membership or your dues are due. You're not going to send them a purchase order for that. You're going to use this payment voucher form to be able to pay for that. Okay? So but it is very specific, and there are actually only a few, maybe 24 or so ways to use a payment voucher. You can find those if you hit that link that's outlined here on this slide. There's a lot of procedural information there about using the payment voucher form. There's also information out there about something else another form that we're not going to go into great detail about, a payment authorization form. There's information there, but it gives you a really clear matrix about what you can use for this payment voucher form, when you can use it, and so that'll help guide you through that process if you think that that's a candidate for a form choice for you. Okay? Questions? You guys all with me? Riveting, right? Come on. Okay, so some of the other forms that are out there, and in a few minutes I'm going to talk a little bit more about a couple of these, but we have something called a sole source justification form, which is a very specialized use. We'll talk a little bit about both after the facts. We've got, if anybody does anything in sponsored projects, there's a special form on the sponsored project side of things. And again, as Gisela helped point out, the form to request a new supplier is there as well. So those are the forms that are out there for your pleasure to use. Okay? All right. So now, I'm going to do this one, right? That's right. Okay. Sorry, we went back and forth a lot yesterday on this. All right. So this is a good depiction in a visual way, for those of you who are visual learners, about what does this whole procure to pay process look like. And it's pretty simple when it's laid out like this. In reality, it's not quite as simple as this depicts, but this is a good way for you to just kind of think about, how does this process even kick off? So the first thing's going to happen when you get into Marketplace, you're going to go into your cart and you're going to open up so that you're out there able to do some shopping. And you're probably going to do a requisition, especially if you're not going directly to those punch-out catalogs. So you're going to go in and you're going to choose the requisition, and then listen to me, if your requisition is above 10,000, and we'll talk about those limits here in a minute. If your requisition is above 10,000, then it's going to come to the PSC, and we are going to kick off a whole process of work around that particular requisition. If it's under 10,000, that requisition is simply going to go through a process in your own business unit to get financial approval and then be issued. But if it comes to the PSC because it's above $10,000, we may have to look at that and decide if there's a solicitation that needs to happen. There may be a contract effort that needs to happen around that as well. And then once all that work is done, and again, a lot of stuff going on in this first area here, then your purchase order will be issued. Once your purchase order is issued, then hopefully very soon after that, you're going to take delivery of your services or of your products, which is then going to cause your supplier to provide you with an invoice, and then there is some work that goes on around that invoicing and payment process, and Maria is going to take you through all of that piece in a little bit. So that's the basic process flow. Make sense? Any questions on that? Okay. So let's talk about some of those general purchasing guidelines. So this is quite a bit of information here, but it's a real good way just to outline all of the different guidelines that we have to work under. And one thing to remember is, because we are a publicly funded institution, we have rules that we have to abide by because we are getting those public funds. So we have our own procurement rules. We used to be part of the states decades ago, but we separated ourselves from the state. So now our own rules are the ones that guide our purchasing activities. And so this gives you an idea. With those rules come different responsibilities at different dollar thresholds. One thing to keep in mind is when it comes to delegated purchasing authority, that is a very specific set of delegations, and you'll see it outlined here at the bottom of the screen, that it's really the Board of Regents for the entire university that says, we are the only ones that really have the authority to buy anything or spend any of the university's money. But for practicality purposes, we are going to give our delegation to, first and foremost, the president, the CEO of the organization, then the president, for common sense purposes and being able to get the work done, because he doesn't want to sit there and do all of this work every day. He's got bigger things to do, so then he delegates that authority to our chief procurement officer, who then has delegated the authority to the purchasing agents that are at the PSC, and in some rare cases, given that delegated authority to campus users as well. Okay, so just keep in mind that, yeah, there's a lot of rules there, but it's all based on the fact that we are considered a public institution. We have to follow some rules that provide for fiduciary responsibility for those taxpayer dollars that come to us. So when it comes to the layout of what those dollar thresholds are. Again, going back to Annie's comment about using the catalog, another reason that it's really easy to use a catalog if you can is that you don't have to worry about us getting in your way up to $25,000. If you can find what you need through one of those catalog providers and you're spending $25,000 or less, go for it. Order it, get it done, get your stuff in place. If you're not using a catalog provider and you're buying a product, you have authority up to $10,000 to buy that product on your own without it stopping at the PSC. Unless your supplier says we want a contract signed, then that contract still has to come to the PSC for signature. If you're buying services over $50,000, then that comes to the PSC. Well, actually, anything over $10,000. Sorry, we're going to talk about building thresholds in a minute. And then you can see some of the delineation between who has approval for those dollar amounts. Obviously, when we spend any big dollars, like over $5 million, the president wants to be able to weigh in on those. So anything that we do that's $5 million or above $5 million will need President Kennedy's approval to do that. Now, we have some work that we have to do around when those purchases come to us based on those dollar thresholds. We have different processes that we have to take. So how many of you have been involved in anything that required a solicitation, either a documented quote or a request for proposal? Anybody? One. Wow, okay. So what happens is we work off of a process or a theory that says we want to provide competition to all of our suppliers. So we believe that when you're buying a good, it's a commodity, and there are a lot of suppliers that can provide us with most goods that we have out there. So in most cases, we will say, if you're going to spend more than $10,000 on a good, we need to compete that. So we will do something called a documented quote, which is a very informal process. We'll get it out there to the supplier community, let them bid on it. We'll make the right decision for the needs that you have. If you're going to be spending $500,000 or more, we're going to do something called a request for proposal. And that's going to be a much bigger, much more formal process that would undertake a bigger effort on your part as well as the PSC's part. If you're going to do something around services, we allow over up to $50,000 for you to buy that without us having to go out and do a solicitation as well. So those are good thresholds to remember. One caveat: if you're going to spend any federal dollars, doesn't matter what you're buying, products or services, $10,000 is the limit before we have to go out and compete that in the supplier community. Okay, I feel like I threw a lot of numbers at you really quickly. Does that make sense? Hopefully this is helpful for you just to see what the guidelines are. Any questions? Okay. So remember, this was a sole source was something that we talked about on as one of those other additional forms. And sole sources may be something that you may be a little bit familiar with. Have any of you done a sole source procurement? Okay, quite a few of you. So this is always a really good question that I get when I go out and talk with different departments. They always want to know, like, what can I say is a sole source or what isn't a sole source? So a sole source really means that there is really only one good or service that will fit the need that you're trying to fill, and you can only buy it from one provider. So an example I like to use is I like Reebok tennis shoes. They're my favorite tennis shoes. I have a daughter who works for Reebok. I can get the best price by going through my daughter who works for Reebok for that favorite brand that I have, but that doesn't qualify as a sole source. Brand name doesn't qualify as sole source. These items over here, price, history, preference, those do not necessarily in and of themselves make something a sole source. In the example of the tennis shoes, I can get Reeboks from any number of locations, right? So just that fact alone does not make them a sole source. However, they may be a sole source if there's some element of continuity in the need that you're looking to purchase. Maybe they will match existing equipment, and that's a reason that you're trying to set this up as a sole source. Or maybe it's going to cost you or the university more if you switch from this particular brand to that particular brand. So if you think of it in terms of like equipment, if you bought a piece of equipment and there's maintenance on that equipment, and that you're going to get the best maintenance on that equipment if you buy it from a approved maintenance provider for that equipment, that may be a sole source justification. Okay? So there are very strict rules around that. The biggest piece of advice I can give you is when you get to the sole source form in Marketplace, take that and do some homework on that. Make sure that you have filled that form out to the best of your ability. When that comes to the purchasing agent on my team, they're going to really look at that and make sure that it can stand on its own merits and that no one else can come back and say, "No, you should have competed that because that doesn't really make your definition of what a sole source is." These are the 3 questions in that gold circle there that are on that sole source form. Make sure you spend some definite time filling that out and answering that as robustly as you can. The needs statement. Tell us why it is that you need that thing or that service. What is so important about it? Why is it that it is so critical that it becomes a sole source? Why is that the only thing that will meet your requirements? Feature requirements, that helps us understand. It's a microscope and it only has, it has a certain level of detail and I can't get that anywhere else. Tell us that. We also want to know that you have considered competing brands. So helping us understand, I've looked and there's no other microscope out there. There's this one and it comes close, but it doesn't do exactly what I want it to do. That's what we want to see in that form. When that comes into us, when the purchasing agent reads that, if they have any questions on it, they're going to kick it back to you and try to have that conversation and that dialogue about why it's maybe not a really strong sole source, and try to help you to write the words in there that do make sense, or vet out whether or not we really should take this out to bid. So that's the parameters around a sole source. Any questions on that? Okay. The other problematic item is something called an after the fact. Has anybody had to do an after the fact? Yeah. Sometimes they happen, and we do allow for a process for those to occur, but we highly discourage them. What an after the fact means is that you have purchased something, you've had that supplier either provide that to you or start on a service before we've issued a purchase order. That's not a good place. That we don't want to put either our suppliers or ourselves in that position. So there's some definite rules around after the facts. We consider that if you're spending more than $10,000. But that's the definition around that. Just know that do everything that you can to avoid that. Try to do the work that you need to do ahead of time. Know that they need to go through approval on your campus. Your campus folks are going to want to know, why did this happen? Is there more training that needs to happen? What is the issue here? Why did this happen? And again, there are circumstances where it happens. Note, the reason they're discouraged is because you have not made that purchase under the purchasing authority of the university. Remember, I showed you before the delegation. You haven't done that process correctly. So you could be personally, financially liable for that purchase if you do an after the fact and don't do it the right way. So I know that's a little bit of a heavy hammer there, but it is really true that there's authority in our processes to be able to do that. Okay. What's next? Okay, contracts. I'm going to speed through this really quickly. Contracts can only be signed at the PSC. Do not sign a contract from a supplier. Supplier may say, excuse me, it's only $5,000 or it's only $2,000. Go ahead. Don't do it. A contract, which is an obligation from the university to the supplier and the supplier back to the university, can only be signed at the PSC. You could, again, find yourself where you're liable for that financial expense if you signed out, and you shouldn't have. Yes, do you have a question? I would highly recommend that you let us look at it, because while you might not be spending dollars on it, there may be some caveat there, some risk, some liability, something else within that agreement that while at the beginning it doesn't look like there's going to be any money exchanged, but if something goes wrong, then there will have to be money exchanged. So we want to protect you from that. Okay, so anything that looks like it's a contract, send it to us. We'll let you know if we don't need to sign it, but 99% of the time we do. Yes. Yes. Great question. I would go to your OCG office first, and then they will let you know if the PSC needs to get involved. It happens on occasion where we both get involved in it. Yep, good question. And then one question here. The person that signs is actually liable for it. And I would say, just real quickly, if you do find that circumstance, send that to us and we'll see if we can do something to rectify that for you so that before an issue happens, we can get that righted. Okay? All right. I would send it to a purchasing agent. So look on our commodity listing, find out who the purchasing agent who is responsible for that particular whatever it was that you bought, and send it to them. Good question. Yes. Correct. Yep. And if you don't have time to do that or you forget how to do that, you can always send it to me. Okay. Okay. Yeah. It would be good if you could triage if it's just Good, here, yep. No, just I think that they're pretty self-explanatory. They're mostly based on dollar amount, that they have to go through certain thresholds, but it's pretty simple to understand. Okay? All right, so now I'm going to turn it over to Maria to talk about invoicing.
Okay, I have. Can you hear me now? Okay. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the invoices. You've gone through the whole process. You've had your contract and everything. So now it comes time to get it paid. So here we just have a little slide on it of, you have the purchase order, you get an invoice. Anything that's over 10K is going to require to be received. If it's a PO, standing POs needs approvals. And then once everything is done, then payments will go out on their payment due dates based on the terms of the POs. So here's a little bit about when do you approve and when do you have to do matching. So anything that's under 10K just goes through a two-way, what we call two-way matching. You need the PO, you need the invoice. If everything matches, the price and the quantity matches, it automatically becomes payable. And as long as everything is within the tolerance and everything, you basically don't have to touch it or look at it or anything. It's available for you to view it in Marketplace. Then you've got the POs that are over 10K. So any PO that's over 10K, it's always going to be requiring receiving it. Even though your invoice might be for $1, that PO drives it that it's over 10K. So you absolutely will always have to do some receipts. You have to go in and do it. And then once it's all matched, we're going to go with you got your invoice, it matches in prices, you got your receipts, it becomes payable, and then the payment is processed. And again, it's always going to go out based on the terms of the PO. Your invoice can be dated 11/19, but if it's got the 30-day terms, it's payable, but it's not going to pay till December, like about 3 days before. And then for anything that's a standing PO, it's always going to require the department's approval to approve that payment. So some causes for some match exceptions, that happens a lot sometimes. So when your price or quantity do not match between the PO, invoice, or if receiving, then that prevents the invoice from payment. Sometimes you might have a PO that you've got it for one at $5,000. If we receive a portion of it, we receive 12%. You need to be sure that you've got that receiving in for 12%. If not one, then at least 12. Sometimes people are like not quite sure, but you will need all to match in order to go. Some common match exceptions, could be you ordered, 10 computers and you end up getting 12. So that's a match exception. Your invoice is greater than your PO. Your items are for $12.50 and it comes in at $20 a piece. That will be a match exception because it's a higher dollar. And keep in mind, we do have a little bit of a tolerance, 10% or $50 per line. So if your item is $10 and it comes in at $10.50, that tolerance will actually, it will. So, and sometimes if they substitute an item, that could cause it to come in at a higher dollar, and that could cause some issues. The most common with SPOs, or really the only ones, is if you're out of money, your SPO is for $25,000, and you get invoices adding more than that. And another big one is the date range. Remember that an SPO has a begin date and an end date. We process it by the date of the invoice. So if your SPO end date is 6/30 and we get an invoice dated November 1st, that could trigger it that it's not going to go and it goes on a special hold. Any question on that? Anything so far? Yes. It happens a lot on the subcontracts and stuff, and I know it's something that we sometimes have to look at it. As long as the invoice clearly says, we know that a lot of these, you'll get invoiced in November for something that happened in, so when you get my little, I'm sure one or several of you have got my little email that says your SPO's out of date range. If you highlight it and remind it, because I just send out the notifications, I don't always, it will, and we try to tell the staff to look at the date. That would be the exception if it's on the invoice. We can backdate it. Okay? Oh, okay. So then how are match exceptions resolved? So you're going to get an email that's triggered to the approver 7 days after the match exception occurs, and the possible match exception is receiving, maybe you need a credit from the supplier because maybe they charge you for more than what was the PO, so then you would want to call them and say, hey, you told us it was going to cost $28, why are you charging us $50? And then if for whatever reason you agree with the higher price, then always email change order to update. Let them know what line, what PO, and what you need. And just remember on copiers, you never have to do any receiving. It's been quite a while that we don't, but you may get a match exception if your contract is for 36 months and you're on, you're going for 5 more months, so you would have to increase the PO for 36. Or a common one for copier is really the copies. How much copies you use, black and white or color. You do an estimate when you start, but a lot of people go over it and you have no control. So then you would want to do a change order to increase that. And that removes the match exception. A little bit on the invoice flows. The great ones that we love, at least in payables, is the electronic one. The supplier sends us the invoice electronically. It is not a piece of paper, but the invoice gets fed into our system. And then if it matches and it gets approved and everything, it goes out. No human interaction. I mean, we're not physically entering it, but. And then the more complex is the paper. So we always say all paper invoices gets emailed to AP Invoice. It's uploaded to Image Now, so we do not physically in payables get to see your email that you sent. And a lot of people think we do. So just know that that invoice is extracted, it's uploaded, and then it's keyed in. After it's been sorted, we have different workflows based on alpha assignment, and that's out there on our webpage, who does what. So it's keyed in, and then enters the invoice, and then if everything goes right, it gets invoiced, approved and everything. If it needs it, then it gets ready, and then it becomes payable, and it'll pay when it's due. Okay, the payment process, just know that everything that we enter in mark, yes. We always need to know the PO. We're not going to attempt to try to guess that what is it, or whatever. So we always should. Mm-hmm. Well, and just know that it's easier if it's on the invoice. I know some people might say on their email, it just makes it easier. If the supplier didn't reference it, just write it. We're not going to send it back because you wrote on it. We just say just don't write over important information. But yeah, we need the PO. Without it, we will, if we know that it belongs to you, we'll send it back to you. Or if it comes from the supplier, we'll return it back to them with a memo saying we can't process it without identifying who it belongs to. Because there's just too many of them, and there's no way that we know who it belongs to.
We're looking at automating in the future to automation in that space.
So the last thing is, once the invoice is payable, it feeds into PeopleSoft on a nightly basis. Once it's payable, and then the checks are processed through PeopleSoft. They're printed they feed nightly, they print every morning, and then they're mailed out the next morning. And it's all based on the terms. Just because it's payable doesn't mean it's going to go out tomorrow. It's based on the terms. And then the other type of payment is the virtual credit card. You might see it on Marketplace that says ACH. It's not a bank-to-bank thing. It's the virtual credit card. We still do paper checks primarily and the Pay Plus. Question. Oh. And I'm the more nervous one, so you can ask me.
So I'll just quick wrap up and then hand it back over to Christine. Are there any questions on things that we have covered here today? That's a great question, Maria. Did you hear that? Oh, sure. So the question was, is there a difference between a subaward invoice payment versus a regular supplier-generated invoice payment? Maria?
Why would no, it's all based on the terms. I think maybe the date might hold it back a little bit if we entered it with the invoice date instead of the date of service. But we try to send notifications, but no, it's not any longer. It's all based on the terms. You can always talk to me afterwards or send something.
Any other quick questions? Okay, thank you.